Now, the next section, I want to talk about preparing your children for wise financial management. And why is this in here? Originally, this was not in the material for Align Lesson 5, but people came to me and asked, how do we prepare our children to live with wisdom financially, and particularly God's wisdom? And here are a couple reasons for it. We're going to talk about legacy a little bit later, but part of what we need to pass on to our children is how to do what God asks us to do with our material resources, our finances, and the material possessions that we have. None of us are born into this world with financial wisdom. Part of every mom and dad is to pass along to their kids what is wise in handling money. But more important than that, as we talk about it in the retirement realm, if in fact we are leaving some to our children, then they need to be wise in handling the assets that were given to us if in fact we trust them with that after we are gone through our financial plans. So let's look at this. How do we carry this out, preparing your children? One, accept your responsibility to train your children. Accept your responsibility to train your children. Proverbs 22:6, very familiar passage. Train up a child in the way he should go, or direct your children onto the right path in this translation. When they're older, they will not leave it. There is something about planting seeds of good financial wisdom in your children's life that will pay off during their lifetime and probably pay off after your lifetime, especially if they become managers of some of your assets. Secondly, model good financial management practices of sharing with others and generosity. A week ago Sunday, our 2 children, spouses, and 6 grandchildren finally got all of our act together, and we pooled our money with every grandchild and every adult, putting in what God wanted them to, and went into the World Vision catalog, and we bought 3 goats, some chickens, some mosquito nets, some clean water for somewhere, and something else along the way. And we're trying to deposit into our family good financial management practices in modeling generosity and helping others. What I was amazed at, and our youngest grandchild, I think, is 10 years old, and 10 up to 20, 21, 22, 6 of them. But a number of the grandchildren said, when their mom or dad went to them and said, how do you want to participate in this project? A number of them said, I want to give my whole month's allowance to that. Wow. I mean, the dollars were not big, but think of that, if we came to you and said, will you give a whole month's salary to buy a goat or a chicken for somebody somewhere in the world? I mean, they're catching this generosity thing, and we are thrilled about that. Discuss your financial responsibilities and decisions with them. Ray and I grew up in an age where it's not near as open as some of the generations after us, and we didn't do a very good job at this, frankly. And if I were to go back, wish I'd have known this, 40, 50 years ago when we were raising kids. But this is where we have an opportunity to talk with our kids, and how we're doing that. If you know Greg Gaynor, I had him give an illustration last week in class about how he started dealing with his 9-year-old girl, and her mom would talk with her when they were shopping. And he said, now at 11, she'll go in a store with her mom and say, Mom, that's not a good deal there. Let's wait until we find it on sale. There's a better price than that. I know that. And just talking with your kids and teaching them a responsibility along the way. Deuteronomy 6, familiar. Do it when you're going in, coming out, lying down, getting up, eating, and so forth. Talking to our kids so it becomes a part of our conversation. Introduce financial responsibility into your children's thinking processes. We've talked previously about how do we do that. Some people do allowances, but there's some risk in that of creating an entitlement mentality. Dave Ramsey says, use commissions. That's the real world. You work, you get something. This handout, just because you happen to breathe or get up out of bed, that's not the real world. So be careful. It's somehow we need to teach that along the way. Introducing financial principles that are age appropriate. Handling money. If I put a nickel and a dime in my hand and offer it to a 2-year-old, what are they going to take? The big one. They're not born with financial sense. Okay, and that just spreads out, and spending and buying and saving and so forth. So somewhere we have to teach our kids along the way, earning money and work, difficult in our society that's moved to a paycheck versus when people were more connected to some space and had responsibilities. Giving, saving, spending, teaching your children that, whether it's with the first dollar they get, you have a little box or jars or something and say, okay, this 10 cents goes in this jar because that's God's, and this 10 cent we're going to save, and then this 70 cents, you can save these up until you have enough to buy that necklace or buy that little whatever they want to do. Teaching them from the earliest age possible about money. And then delayed gratification, the curse of our society, I want it and I want it now. And that's why we end up with no money for retirement, and that's why we take out of our 401k and say it won't make any difference. It will make a difference. Expect and allow mistakes because kids are growing, okay? And then talk about the mistakes of buying it for full price. Or I remember one of my profs at seminary, Howard Hendricks, talked about his girl. Just couldn't talk her out of buying a necklace. She knew it was so cheap that it wouldn't last. Well, she bought it willfully, and then on the way home it broke and cried all the way home. Well, that's how you learn. you tears and mistakes. Pray for each one's growth and financial responsibility, watching them grow, learn more and more about money. Greg Gaynor just smiles when he talks about little Colby and how wise she is. Has her own investment account already at 11. Walks into the broker and says, here's what I want to do today with my investments. Wow. Allow for personality differences. When our daughter was buying a house over in Siloam, she talked to a realtor, happened to be a mother, son, and a realtor just volunteered. This son here, he really knows how to take care of money. My other son grew up in the same home. He doesn't have a dime to his name. Personality differences. Some are savers, some are spenders, and we need to work with them. Now, we're going to move to a video now to close out our time. It's Mr. and Mrs. Chet Stewart, Chet and Diana Stewart, Albuquerque, New Mexico, just to set the stage. Funeral home directors, but an interesting story of where they are today, how they learned about putting some of the principles we're talking about here. You will see illustrated what we talked about, particularly with trusting your children for taking care of some of your things when you're gone. And listen for what the wife says about trusting their kids as good financial managers. Okay?
You know, facing the reality of the life to come is really something that you think about when you see death all the time. Well, I'm Chet Stewart.
And I'm Diana.
And we're from Albuquerque, New Mexico.
And we've been married 46 years.
I have to tell you, our work, what we do, has affected how we view what God has given us. In 1904, my grandfather, Chester T. French, came to Albuquerque with his younger brother who had tuberculosis. And back in those days, they didn't know how to treat it except to take the person to a dry climate. And so that's what led him to come to Albuquerque. And his brother died shortly after that. And he took him back to East Tennessee, to where the family was from, and he was buried there. But in the process, he began to sense a calling to go into funeral service because he had been through this death experience with his brother. And he came back to Albuquerque, and he started the business in 1907. In 1964, when I was stationed in San Antonio at Fort Sam Houston, and I was about to get out of the military, he called me and he said, I want you to come to Albuquerque and be my partner in the business. And he was 82 at the time, I was 24. And I came, and in my mind I was coming for a year really out of respect for my grandfather. And he died 3 weeks after I got back. And so very quickly I had the responsibility for running the business at a very young age. Well, the first year that I was here, I began to see that funeral service was a ministry to people, or it could be a ministry to people. And I began to see that my gifts and talents really kind of fit that ministry. And I really began to sense that God was calling me to do it, and that we could really make a difference in the lives of people by serving them genuinely, with high integrity, and with great compassion. And I realized early on that you really weren't ready to live until you were ready to die. And if you're ready to die, then your living is going to be much more meaningful, and what you do is going to be much more meaningful.
I think it has shaped me in the way that when I've gone to funerals and helped with funerals, how you can tell the kind of a life a person's lived by the way the funeral is. You can always tell the givers from the takers.
When you can really begin to understand what the Bible says about giving, it's just so life-changing. And you realize that the stuff that you have is just stuff, and it's so temporary. And you're not taking it with you. You know, being in the funeral business, we realize that we don't have any trailers behind our hearses. You know, both of us were brought up to give. We believed in tithing. We always tithe. And a few years ago, when we went to the first Generous Giving Conference, I think it just kind of opened up the lenses of what biblical generosity really was.
When we began to learn that, to really experience the freedom that if it's all His, then it's all right. It's all His.
Because we always believed that God was the owner, but we were controlling it. And the control issue was really the big thing for us. And so we began to give, I hate to talk about what we're giving, but we started giving substantially more. And of course, a lot of that came out of our assets. Because we decided we don't need to grow our assets anymore. We have far more than we need. And God has used that to help us get rid of the fear that we had, you know, the fear of being secure. You know, the only place that we need to be secure is in His hands. You know, we want to be in His hands.
I think we get locked in that tithe box, and it's not a bad box. It's just not the only box. It's not a big enough box.
And our prayer has been in the last part of our lives that we would still be able to make a difference in the lives of people we come in contact with, because, you know, ultimately we're not going to be here, and the lives of our kids, how they're bringing up their kids, is really important to us, and how our sons value their wives and love their wives, very important to us. We're leaving our kids some money because we trust them.
Now they've proved it.
They prove that they're accountable, and they love God, and they're serving Him. So we are leaving our kids some of our resources, and then we're also the rest will be in a trust that they will control how it's distributed, how it's given. When you realize that the greatest gift that was ever given was what God gave us in the gift of His Son, it's a life-changing thing. And when you can really begin to understand what the Bible says about giving, it's just so life-changing. You know, you just realize as you get older, if people could just really understand, there's so little understanding of biblical generosity, the difference it makes in your lives, how much richer you can be.
Sharing what we have is a way to do that. Even if I can't go, I'm not called to go to Africa or wherever. I can help somebody do that, and that's eternal.
The reason I like that video, it picks up what we've talked about all the way up to lesson 5 of the phrases that maybe you heard in there. God is the owner of all, generosity. His statement, we're not ready to die until we're ready to live. And then the little word by Diana, his wife, we trust him now. It takes raising up our children if they're going to be managing some of our money.